OK, so those are the options 100 years on. Let's discuss them now with Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP, Ben Bradshaw, Labour MP, and Gillian Keegan, Conservative MP, all with different ideas. Hope we're not going to argue about those definitions. More or less right?
Yep.
Yeah, not bad.
OK, good.
Pretty good.
But you've got a different idea, Gillian Keegan. What would you like to do?
Well, I think I'm back in still the Prime Minister's deal. What the Prime Minister's deal is, it's a bespoke arrangement, effectively. So it's kind of got, it's trying to achieve the same as Norway is trying to, which is basically to have frictionless trade. But it does it in a way which is bespoke to us. So one of the things that we try to respect from the referendum result is ending free movement, which wouldn't be in Norway. So I believe, personally, that the Prime Minister's deal is a bit more ambitious than Norway. But of course, I do understand that it is a political declaration that we have to turn into an agreement. But I feel quite comfortable that we have a good negotiating position.
And this document, whose document is this?
Well, I've looked at them all over the weekend again. So this one is the Better Deal, Better Future. This is the one that I guess the Brexiteers are supporting. And then I've also got some notes on Common Market 2.0, which is, I think, Stephen's got.
We'll hear about that. So are you supporting the Brexiteers version?
No, I'm not. No, it's basically, it doesn't actually give any answers to what should happen on the border. That still remains to be, and actually, it's still a deal. It's still a deal that needs to be done. And one of the things about all of these agreements is, if there is something that needs to be negotiated after, March, if there is something that we basically say we're going to put this on the back burner until, between March and December, anything needs a backstop. So no matter what, the thing that is causing the Prime Minister's deal most trouble is the backstop. That will have to be fixed in almost all of the scenarios.
Okay. What's your proposal? You've
So,
got another document now.
Here's one I prepared earlier. It's a bit like being on Blue Peter, Adam. Common Market 2.0, in effect, is what's often called the Norway Plus option. It means going into the European Economic Area via the EFTA pillar. But it is a 21st century version of that, because we know that there are safeguard clauses in the EEA agreement on free movement of labour. We know that it also would deal with the backstop, because once we've got full single market access through the EEA, plus a form of customs union, that's the plus bit of Norway Plus, you deal with the Northern Irish border and the backstop falls away.
Single market access, how much does it cost us? And also it does mean freedom of movement, doesn't it?
Well, on the cost, if we assume that we use the same per capita methodology that is used for Norway, it's about 50% of what Norway pays per capita. On free movement of labour, I accept that we couldn't use those safeguard clauses lightly, but Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement are absolutely clear. They're there in black and white. You have an emergency brake and the ability under 113 to renegotiate on a long-term basis how free movement of labour works. Using them is a decision of the sovereign British Parliament and sovereign government, but that is, of course, a big difference to what we have if we were fully members of the European Union, where there's no controls at all.
Bradshaw, you could buy that, couldn't you?
I completely agree with Stephen that a Norway-style deal is the least damaging Brexit, and it also helps resolve the Irish border question. I'm sceptical as to whether A, it can get through Parliament, and B, whether the European Union would allow a lengthy extension of Article 50 for an uncertain destination point. But let's put it to the test. Let's put these options to the test in Parliament. But I think that even in the end, if we get Norway or something like it, whatever it is, it's going to be very different from the deal that was sold to the British public in 2016. So I think there's a very strong principle case for saying, if it's Norway, if it's Theresa May's deal, if it's whatever else, that the people should be given the final say on this.
But isn't there a problem that if that's what Parliament agrees, people will say stitch up and, and they'll just kick you in the teeth in the referendum?
I think one of the problems with them, I mean, I voted for Norway last May, and I've been arguing ever since the referendum with the Prime Minister, she needs to compromise, she needs to do the least damaging Brexit. However, I think you're absolutely right. At this stage, if somehow Parliament agreed for a Norway-type thing or a softer alternative to Theresa May's deal, a lot of people out there who voted Leave and Remain wouldn't be happy, and they'd say this is a politician's stitch-up.
They voted down the referendum. So
well, they might vote it down in a referendum, but let's give them the chance to do that. Let's give them a chance to express their opinion.
Anything wrong wrong with Norway from your point of view?
The freedom of movement break basically means that you have to have serious society, economic or environmental concerns, and then you can apply the break. I don't think we have ever met those conditions, and I don't think a country our size would ever meet those conditions. So that's why I think just clear ending of free movement, which is, I think, probably the number one requirement of those who voted to leave.
So you couldn't go into the single market even though it was Mrs Thatcher's idea, as it were?
I mean, Mrs Thatcher's idea, when it was the idea, is now the referendum has come up with an alternative answer. I mean, that's the difficulty we're all wrestling with. So the reason I prefer the Prime Minister's deal is it's much clearer on freedom of movement, and I believe we do need to have our own immigration policy. I think it's going to be, as Ben said, it is hard to sell back to the British people because who knows which part of the messages they took on board before they voted. But I think personally, of all the people I've spoken to, the number one objective would be to at least have a control over our own immigration policy.
So your plan's just not firm enough?
Well, the problem with the Prime Minister's deal is it's dead in the water. It's just been crushed
Only
in
because you've
Parliament
killed it.
by 230. Well, but thanks for accepting that it's dead. So
No, I think
it's
it
an
could still be
academic
alive.
discussion. The Prime. We are now down to, I think, 3 options: leave with no deal at all, catastrophe for the British economy, a second referendum. I have deep reservations about that because I think that it would just be dividing
Well, we sort
a
of know what
deeply
the question
divided
would be,
country.
do we, either?
Or the Common Market 2.0 option. I think it's time for Parliament to rediscover the lost art of compromise. And I also think that with this, it is an amendment to the political declaration. It's the only thing that's got a chance of getting through with either before the 29th of March or possibly with a very small extension
but you do
to
have a
Article
problem
50.
with that, which is that not only did a majority, 17.4 million, vote to leave, but we've now got opinion polls showing that 28% are quite happy to leave without a deal.
That's what's terrifying about a second referendum. I personally can't support a ballot paper in a second referendum which has no deal on it, because I know that would finish the steelworks in my constituency, and we cannot play Russian roulette.
you are happy to say, I, as a parliamentarian, am willing to defy the will of the people as expressed in the referendum?
I've always felt that 52-48 was a mandate to move house but stay in the same neighbourhood. You can try to do a micro-analysis of all 17.4 million people and why they voted. It's impossible, but you can take it as an aggregate. 52-48 is a mandate for a soft Brexit. It always has been, and that's why there's always been a parliamentary majority for it.
To be fair to Steve and Adam, Norway is still leaving. I mean, it is outside the
Brexit,
European Union, but for
Well,
that
not
very reason...
according to Mark Francois or
which is
Bernard
exactly
Jenkins or
why,
whatever.
which is exactly why I think
Not
that in
not
the
sure we should
end,
let them
I
set
don't
their
agree
lines.
with Stephen that to put this proposition or any other proposition back to the people if Parliament can't agree is somehow... We're divided already as a country, and if we're going to be dragged out, if the people who voted Leave or Remain are going to be dragged out on a deal which most of them don't like, that's really going to cause lots of public anger.
So what would your
division.
question be?
I think that would be for Parliament to decide. I don't have a firm view on that at the moment. Certainly Remain would have to be, because that's the best deal. The best deal is the one we have at the moment. That would have to be on the ballot paper.
So wouldn't it just be a rerun, Remain or Leave?
Not
no
necessarily.
deal?
You could I think you might have to have something that would appease the hard Brexiteers on there as well, but that would be for Parliament ultimately to decide democratically.
Well, I'm not in favour of a second referendum at all. I think it's very disrespectful to the people who voted in the first referendum to leave. I didn't, but I know many people who did, and they would feel very insulted by that. And actually, I think it's an abdication of our duty. If we can't get in a room, a big room, and sort out a deal to leave the European Union in the best interest of our country, then there's something wrong with us. Because I believe the more you look at
But
no
that's
deal...
the point, isn't it? I mean,
it is,
you've
but
had
we've
2.5
still got...
years and there must be something wrong with you.
It always happens in the last weeks, and we are in the last, months at the moment. So that is not unusual, because people have to move the art of the compromise, as Stephen says. But the more you look at no deal, the closer you get to really understanding it. And I'm not saying all 28% didn't look at the great detail, but they may not have. The more you understand it, the more you think that is really not a good option.
Yeah. Well, on that we can all agree.
And now, Stephen, you've worked in Brussels. What do you say to this? And we do hear it often. We heard it yesterday from Liam Fox saying, Brussels always does things at the last minute. They always give way. They always make concessions at the last minute. I mean, having been at quite a lot of all-night sessions at the European Council, I mean, there is an element of truth in that, isn't there?
Yeah, but when it comes to trade negotiations, they are as hard as nails, and they always have been. And what we're seeing here is a well-established process that the European Union has negotiated dozens and dozens of trade deals, and they will not relent on protecting their own interests. They will not relent on protecting the integrity of the single market. That is a simple reality that has always been the case.
But aren't their own interests flexible trade with the UK?
Sure, but in the end, they know that we will suffer far more from a no-deal Brexit than they will, and that's why it's always been an asymmetric relationship, and that's why I think I actually agree absolutely with Gillian's view that it's up to us as parliamentarians now to step up to the plate and make this happen. But I have to say, if those campaigning for a second referendum were able to define very clearly what the question on the ballot paper would be, it would make it much easier to have a discussion about whether or not it's a viable option. But as things stand, there isn't really a clear plan in place, and I think we are so close to the wire now, it's too risky to vote for something or support something which doesn't have that clarity.
What do you think the chances of a last-minute breakthrough are?
Very slim. This is not like a normal negotiation, Adam. This is a choice that we've made as a country, and we still have to decide what sort of Brexit we want. And that's why this latest thing from the Prime Minister is that the bilateral talks with the Irish government are going to resolve the Irish.
Ridiculous.
It's for the birds.
It's
I mean,
ridiculous.
it's delusional, and that's the problem. She's still sticking to her red lines. No sign of compromise. We've got to find a way forward for the sake of the country.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed.